Hello and welcome back to the Little Craft House. Today we are going to be creating some polymer clay hoop earrings. I've got 4 different designs for us to make today, so I thought I'd bring you along with me. So join me if you'd like to see how I make them. I've got a few tips and tricks to share along the way, and they're definitely lots of fun to make. So let's get started. So I wasn't 100% sure on what colour palette that I was going to go with today. So I just grabbed a bunch of coordinating colours just to give me a little bit of inspo. So most of these colours are just mixes of leftover scrap clay from previous projects. So there's no colour recipes for these ones. They're just all one-of-a-kind colours. I also do have a pack of the poppy seed souffle as well as a souffle guava. Black always comes in super handy, and recently I've really been gravitating towards pink, so I thought I would just grab that in case I decided to use that as well. I've also got a couple of designs to the side that I may try and incorporate. We'll just see how we go. So as far as hoop creating, you don't need a lot of fancy tools. I do have my extruder here along with my little tin of all my discs as well as my little hole cutters there as well. Now, if you don't have an extruder, don't stress, you can just roll your snakes of clay manually. But if you do have an extruder, definitely a game changer, makes things so much easier. I've also grabbed a bunch of my metal shape cutters here. We can use these as hoop guides to help us form the shapes of our hoops. They are metal, so they're able to go in the oven. And even though we're mainly focusing on circles today, metal shape cutters come in a range of shapes. So you can definitely get creative with using those other shapes as well. So even if you don't have those, again, don't stress, not a problem, not a necessity, but if you do have them, they will come in very handy. So jumping straight into our first design, and I decided that I'm not going to use any of those nice colours that I picked out and put to the side there. Instead, I am going to use one of my stashed designs. So the design that we're using has a lot of black in it, so I've cut myself some black to use as my base for the hoops. Now, my biggest tip for using an extruder is to make your clay nice and soft. The softer the clay is, the easier it is going to extrude, and your hands will thank you for it. So let's just make sure that we get this nice and conditioned up. No such thing as over conditioning when it comes to using the extruder. If you've made it too soft, we can always let it rest and chill out in the freezer for a little bit to firm it back up if need be. Being soft will also help to reduce the risk of it cracking whilst coming out of the extruder. Sometimes you'll find that your clay will kind of crack and be a little bit uneven on the edges once it passes through the extruder. That can be because it isn't conditioned enough, it's not soft enough. It could also be because of your disc. So take the disc out and flip it over, because sometimes that kind of contributes to the cracking of the clay. If you've extruded your clay and you find that it does have some little crackles and you're able to just use your fingers to kind of smooth it out, you can definitely do that. Now, another little problem that can happen whilst using, I say problem, it's not really a problem, it's a little hiccup that can happen whilst using your extruder, is that whilst in that conditioning stage, sometimes air bubbles get trapped within your clay. So when we extrude it out, you're putting all that pressure onto the clay to extrude it out. Those bubbles get trapped, and then as they come out of the extruder, they kind of pop and burst a little hole into your clay snake. I'm going to call it a snake because it looks like a snake. So it'll burst and pop, make a little hole in your clay snake. I will show you this afterwards because it does happen to me today. But again, just using your hands just to smooth over the clay generally can fix that problem. And because today we're going to be covering that base piece, it won't actually be an issue either. Now, I'm just trying to find some discs here that are big enough. So I don't want the small disc. I want the largest circle disc that I have. I've also pulled out the hexagon style as well, because I'm going to use both the circle and the hexagon over the next couple of designs. So circle for this one, and I'll pop that hexagon to the side in a second. I have quite a lot of discs because I have quite a lot of extruders. I have different coloured extruders because it's more fun to pick a different colour each time I use them. Right, so now I've got my clay in, I've put the disc on and I've tightened the top there. I'm now going to start extruding the clay. So just going to wind it around. I like these windy type of extruders much better than the push type. I find the push type really puts strain on your thumbs and it hurts your hands a lot. I know you can get attachments for these as well to go onto your drill to make it a lot quicker. To be honest, I kind of like doing it by hand. So we're just going to wind it. It is tough on your hands, but it's worth it. So going to wind it and get all that clay extruded out. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have an extruder, you can just start rolling your clay by hand. If you do have an acrylic plate of some sort, that will help to keep your clay snake even. Otherwise, just use your hands. Totally up to you, just use what you have. I mentioned before about the bubbles and with it coming out popping. Well, that happened just there on here. So you see how it's got that little hole and it's cracked open. So we just need to kind of cover that over, smooth it out. Because that's on the end, I could probably just chop that bit off. It tends to happen quite often right in the middle. So I've just spotted another one just there in the middle. So yeah, if you can cut them out, but if you can't, that's right. You can just kind of roll over and smooth it out. The air has escaped, so it's not trapped in there. You've just got to make sure that you've made it even and smooth again. So I've got my acrylic plate here, and then that's just going to help to keep it even. So just going to roll it over. It's also helping to straighten that snake as well, because it's got that little bit of a wobble in it. So just using the plate just helps to straighten it. Now I'm just looking for which circle I would like to use as my guide. Obviously don't want my hoops to be too big, so I'm just working out how much clay actually first I'm going to need, because that's around about the sizing that I want to go with. So just using that as a guide for how much clay for each one. Also, by cutting them down just smaller into the individual size, they're definitely just much more manageable. So if I left it as one big long snake, it just becomes too hard to work with. So I prefer to chop them down a little bit here, and it doesn't matter if they're not completely even because they're going to change slightly along the way anyway. I thought that other piece looked a little bit thinner, so I'm just rolling this one down just to thin it out a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, I did a tutorial where I made some brightly coloured earrings on a black background. I had some leftovers, so this was the leftovers of the design that I made, and then this was part of the tutorial where I showed what I did with the leftover scrap clay. So I just had it put aside, and when I was looking earlier, I thought, you know what? I think that will make some pretty hoops. So that's what we're going to use. What I'm going to do though is I need to stretch it out a bit longer so that it's going to wrap around both of these clay snakes. I also need, I don't want my hoops to be too thick and chunky. So again, I do need to roll them out thinner. So I'm just going to put that design through the pasta machine on a thinner setting just to stretch it all out. I could roll those base snakes down to being thinner if it wasn't possible to roll this design out thinner. So yeah, just kind of play it by ear there depending on which one you need, or I could have just wrapped it and made it chunky. I'm lucky though that this design allows it to be stretched out, and I actually think it looks better being stretched out than it did being smaller. I just realised that the knife that I'm using today was from that tutorial where I covered it in the design that we made. So yeah, I'll link that one in the description box if you want to go back and have a look at that tutorial. Now I'm just working out what's the best way to roll these hoops. So do I go sideways or long ways? And I think I'm going to go long ways because that's what's going to get the most colour and the most pattern visible, I think. And I'm just going to trim down the top and bottoms just so that it's not uneven and cracked like it was. And also just picking which is the better side, because I obviously want more colour and more design visible. So straight edges is definitely important, helping to join it up once we have rolled it. So I flipped it over because the good side is now facing down, which will be visible once we roll it. And we're just going to make sure that we're smoothing it on so that there's no air getting trapped under it as well. My knife didn't really want to work properly there. Kind of had to pull it off. And this is what I love about polymer clay, is that there's no wastage. So that scrap from that previous project has now been used for this, and I've definitely got some left over as well, so I can use that for another project later on as well. So they are looking pretty good. There's lots of colour there. I'm going to need to roll them just to close up that join. So that again is going to take it a bit thinner, take the hoops that little bit thinner. So the plate comes in really handy for this because you can put even pressure onto it. And it's really good when it meets up nicely and you can't even see that seam line. So just by accident there, I kind of twisted it, and I think that looks really good. It makes the colours more visible because there is those little areas of black. So we're just gonna give it that little roll and twist, make it permanently stay twisted. I just love the colours in this. That fluoro pink that I used, it really pops so nicely against the black. All right, they look awesome. And so now I just need to trim them down properly so that they are now equal sizing. Again, there will be another opportunity to trim these down afterwards, but just every step of the way, I just want to try and get them as even as I can. So I've grabbed my baking tray here. Because I only have one of each of these metal cutters, I can't do them both together, but if I had two, I could form them around like this and then just put them in the oven as is. I wouldn't take the cutter out, I would just leave it because it's metal, be completely fine in the oven, and the clay would remove fine from it. But I only have one in that size, so I'm just using it as that bit of a guide, and I'm just going to gently remove it, keeping that shape the same, and then I will do my other one. So afterwards we are going to trim those ends, so it doesn't matter if it is completely even or not at the moment. So just forming that around again, and then very carefully removing the circle. I'm just going to leave them on the tray for now, and we'll put them into the oven afterwards with the other designs that we make. So moving on to our second design, but first we just need to clean the extruder. I quite often get asked about the extruder and how dirty the internal channel gets. Mine actually doesn't get very dirty at all. It's just that top bit that I need to clean. So I've made sure that I've wound it all the way up so that that pressing part is kind of sticking out, and I'm just giving it a wipe with the baby wipe. I'm just going to wind it all the way back now, and you can see there inside in the tube, tunnel, whatever it's called, it's actually really clean. I think there is a rubber seal that's part of the extruder that pushes the clay up, so it actually keeps it really clean. So if you find that your internal tube is getting messy, maybe take it apart and see if that rubber seal needs replacing. So just going to clean the disc and clean that top part, because they are the bits that do get dirty, and especially because I've just used black and now I'm going to use pink. So I don't want any colour transfer. So we're just going to clean that up. And I didn't do a very good job of wiping my bench there. Hopefully I realise in a minute and clean that. Okay, so on to the next one. I've got my pink here, and again, it's already conditioned, but I'm just going to give it a really good squeeze and get it into that tubular shape to be able to put into the extruder. I'm just going to wind the extruder all the way back. So when I planned out these designs, not that I did a lot of planning for today's tutorial, but when I was thinking about what we were going to do, I didn't originally plan on doing that twisty motion on that first pair of hoops. So this one we are going to kind of repeat that a little bit, but it is slightly different. So this time I'm going to use the hexagon disc in the extruder. When this extrudes, it's going to give us just some really subtle points on the snake that it extrudes. Now the only disadvantage about this shape is that you can't then use the acrylic plate to smooth or to roll the shape. Now as I'm extruding here, watch carefully and you'll see where a little bubble forms just there, just came out. So yeah, I've got another little divot in my clay because obviously I trapped some air in there. You can see those little holes. So we just have to be really careful as we fix that because we can't use the acrylic plate for it. So we just have to use our hands and smooth it down. And you can see there what I mean about those edges that we've got on the clay. Yeah, look at that. That's quite a big bubble actually. So I'm just going to hold it and smooth like that between my fingers. Just give it a gentle sort of rub just to straighten it out. And then we're just going to do that twist motion again. And I think by having those edges on the clay, it just makes that twist, it gives it that really nice effect anyway. It makes it more sort of like three-dimensional, whereas the one we just did was quite smooth. This has got that texture to it. So I'm just going to work it until I'm happy with how it's looking. So to make this pair a little bit different from the hoops that I normally do, we're going to use a hoop finding. So these ones are 40mm stainless steel hoops, and we're actually going to cut them down. So very carefully, we are going to use my pliers here to cut, and I've got to hold it really carefully because when I've done this once before, those pieces went flying across the room. So I'm just trying to hold all three pieces together so they don't go flying. Just give them a snip. There we go. So we've got the rounded bit and we've got the joiner, the top join bit there. And I'm going to use this base piece as a bit of a template, but really I did just try and cut it in the halfway mark. So as long as I get that first cut there, I know whereabouts to go on the second. So for this pair of hoops, I'm going to use the top section that's got the join. I'm going to put those base pieces to the side because I have a different idea for those, but I've got to experiment first before I make that into a tutorial. So these ones hook together like that. So they will go together. So that's going to form the top of our hoops, and then the clay is going to form the bottom piece. So I'm just, again, using those circle shape cutters just to kind of form a bit of a circle guide, making sure that I've got the shape right. And I'm just going to trim it here just to make it a nice, smooth, even end. And that's the shape that I'm sort of looking at, so we'll do that. There's not quite enough clay there to make a second piece, so what I'll do is I'll just re-extrude that afterwards with the scrap bits, which will give me enough for the second piece. Okay, so I just extruded a second piece, and I decided that it's actually too big. I think they were bordering on being too big, so I'm just going to use that smaller circle as a smaller guide. I think this is a much nicer size. Yeah, that bit's stuck on my bench. I'm not sure what it is. I'll need to work on that afterwards. It's really annoying me. Right, so we've got our 2 earrings here, and now we're going to attach the findings into them. So I'm actually going to bake these metal pieces in. So I'm going to use some Sculpey liquid clay as a bit of an adhesive to hold it in position. If it doesn't hold strong enough, once they're baked, I will give it a wiggle. If I find that they're not holding strong enough, I will pull the pieces out and add some super glue and then reinsert them. That should then definitely hold them. But I think, and I'm hoping that the liquid clay will be enough. So I'm just going to push it down reasonably far as well so that it's got a good bit of grip in there. And I need to do the other side as well. Gently pushing that in. And I'm just going to hook that together so that it forms that shape. And I'll have another fiddle around in a minute once I move it onto the tray anyway. But there we go, that's the sort of look I was going for. I think that's really cool. It's a bit different and it's not the same as the other hoops that I've created in the past. I have attempted this design previously where I've actually tried extruding the clay to be hollow and then threading it onto the hoop. That didn't work well. So I think that this is definitely the better solution for it to get this type of look. So I'm pretty happy with how they are positioned. I'm just going to move them very carefully onto my tray. I probably should have done that positioning on the tray, but they actually held up pretty good then when I moved them. I was a bit worried that they might have misshapen again. So whilst I was creating that design, I had these ones in the oven. So I only cooked them for 10 minutes, which is just enough to firm them up, but still allow them to be soft enough that I can cut through them. So I'm just going to use that scalpel knife just to even up the ends. It actually cuts through really nicely. And then by placing on top of each other, then I can make sure that I'm slicing in the same space so that they are an even size. And then I'll pop those ones back in the oven now for a full cure. The next style of hoops we're going to do, they can be either called hoops or huggies. They are solid hoops, I guess, is the description. So rather than being like a hollow circle like we've just done, they're going to be more of a full shape. So I've got some of those clays that I pulled out earlier, and I was just trying to find some that coordinate with each other. So just going to run each of the colours through the pasta machine to get them that even thickness. And for this design, I decided that I'm going to use the flower shape cutter. So I am going to cut 2 of the purple. I didn't have a lot of purple. I probably would have preferred to have purple as the main colour, but that's okay. I'm just using what I have. So 2 purple and then 4 of this mustard colour. And I don't know why I tried picking them up with my fingers, because that's going to distort the shape. I need to get my blade underneath and lift them up that way to keep the shapes in shape. All right, so I'm going to layer them. So I'm going to do a mustard colour face down so that the good side is facing out. I'm going to do the purple in the centre, and I'm going to really gently, sorry that's not in frame, I'm going to really gently squish them together so that I'm making sure that they're bonded nicely together with no gaps. And then I'm going to put another mustard on the outside. Just slightly pressing it together to make sure that it's nicely bonded. And then I'm going to do the same with the next one. They're actually kind of reminding me a little bit of a cake slice or a cookie or a sandwich even. Okay, so they're looking kind of cute, but I think they're a little bit boring. So I'm going to add some texture. So I could have done this first, but I've only just decided. So I'm going to sandwich the clay in between this mold and just apply a really light amount of pressure, because I don't want to distort that flower shape. So ultimately I probably should have done it first before I assembled it, but that actually worked out not too bad. It's a little bit faint on the underneath, but the top side's good, so I don't mind that. I'm going to do it with the second one, and I'll just try and put a little bit more pressure on just to try and get that imprint to be a little bit more defined. That's better, that one worked out quite good. Just a really subtle pattern. Okay, so now I need to make them into that sort of huggy hoop style thing that we're creating. So I've got another metal shape cutter. This is the square, and I'm going to cut a little, I guess, triangle out of it. So I'm going to go at the half petal point on one and a full petal, so 1.5 petals that I'm taking off. And I'm just trying to do it where that pattern is a bit lighter, just so that that way I'm not removing the good bit of pattern. And then I'm just going to keep that cut out within the cutter there, just to make sure that I'm cutting both even. And that one there had a little bit of dirt on one of the petals, so I've made sure I've cut that off. There we go. And the good thing about this design is that where that slice is, that's thick enough that I'm going to be able to put a 6mm earring post on it, so that way it's easy to attach a post. Sometimes if I'd done this thinner, it would have been really hard to attach the post. I have done embedding posts before. That works well as well, but with these ones, I am just going to glue some posts on afterwards. So I don't know if you just saw, I had a little tool which I just sort of smoothed out some of the rough edges a little bit. And then these ones are now ready to go in the oven as well. So even though those other ones were partially baked, I'm still going to pop them in for an hour at 130 degrees. So while they're baking, we're going to do my final design. This little blend that I've got here was from a reel that I did the other day. Again, I just put it to the side, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to use it for hoops today. Kind of still goes with our colour palette, and the clay that I am extruding was a bunch of scraps, so it actually turned out to be quite a nice peachy colour. And yeah, just being able to reuse it is what I wanted to be able to do. So just going to extrude that out. And this pair of hoops, again, is very similar to the first one because we're going to wrap, but I just thought I would show it with this colour blend. I really liked the idea of the colour changing within the earrings. So I'm just going to cut them in half, again, just to make it a little bit more manageable, and just going to smooth out with the acrylic plate. So just making sure that I'm choosing the better side of the blend to be on the outside. And we need to just make that first slice so that it's a nice straight line. I didn't bother cutting the edges off of this one because I am going to be trimming down the whole thing afterwards anyway. So I know that what I'm creating is a bit longer than what I want. So I just thought I would save myself that time of cutting those edges. So I'm just going to give them a roll over. Obviously I didn't bond that one closed enough, so just going to add a little bit of pressure there just to make sure that it's actually closed up before I use the plate. There we go, that's better. Okay, so looking at this design now, in these colours sitting here, they're reminding me of cigarettes, and yeah, that's not the look I was going for. So I needed to work out a way to just change it up a little. I mean, they're not going to be long earrings like this anyway, so they're not going to actually look like that when they're done. But I do just need to work something out to change it up just a little bit because I don't want cigarette earrings. So once I'm happy with how they're rolled there, I'm now just chopping the ends off just to even them up now at this point. So I decided to go with foil. So I've got some gold foil and I thought that would be quite nice with that coral orange and that white speckle that's on the other end. So I'm just using my knife to really gently scrape at the foil just to make some small little pieces, and then I'm going to use the little texture tool here to move them over and put them into the center line just to fancy it up a little bit. And as I'm putting it on, I'm just applying a little bit of pressure to make it textured. So I don't know if you can quite see it there. Let's have a look. There we go, just adding those little dots. That's going to push the foil into the clay, so it's not going to be, it's not going to come off easy. It'll hold on because it's been pushed into the clay. Okay, so I'm just going to speed it up a little bit whilst I apply the foil around the design. And it looks quite good. Just a little subtle shimmer on it, but yeah, that looks quite pretty. a little bit less cigarette-like. I'm just going to give another quick little roll over just to make sure it's all smooth and straight again, because I was doing a lot of handling there, so it's kind of misshapen it a little bit. And I couldn't quite decide what shape I wanted to do them in now, so I've just grabbed a oval Easter eggy style cutter just to play around. I don't know. Maybe like a funky sort of shape if I kind of twist it, although I don't want it to look like a bent cigarette. That's stuck in my head now, so now I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I need to make it not like that. Okay, I think I'm just going to go with this sort of more oval shape, like that. And the seam line's a little bit obvious on one of these, so I'm just trying to make sure that both the seam lines are on the internal as well. So if you do have visible seam line, just make sure that it's on the inside so it's not on the outside being super noticeable. So they are now all out the oven. These have got a pretty good hold, and because the polymer is slightly flexible, you're able to open and close those findings nicely. So one great thing about the hoops, especially that one there, because the findings are already part of it, they're done. There's no need for sanding. So even those black ones, no need for sanding. I'm just going to apply the posts and they're done. The little flowers, because some of those petal bits didn't quite meet up equally, I have given them a quick little sand over just to make them match up nicely. So we're going to apply the posts. I just use E6000 glue. That's my favourite glue. I have the most success with that one. Obviously trial and error with your own glues, but this one is my fave. So just going to put a small little dot onto each of the pieces, making sure that I've got it on the right side, of course. And on the end of these hoops, they're cut nice and flat, so the post will go on there nicely. And I'm going to use the 6mm posts. I tested them before and they fit on both of these nicely without any overhang. So that's the size post that I'll use. So this brings me to the end of today's hoop tutorial. Hopefully you have enjoyed coming along for the ride with me whilst I create these earrings. And if you're looking for more polymer clay tutorials and inspo, don't forget to check out my channel, as I have some shorts over there as well as my full-length tutorials. You can also find me over on Instagram and Facebook as well. So thanks again for joining me. Hope you've enjoyed it. I will see you again next week with another tutorial. I'll see you then. Bye.